All right, so before we start game three, is any questions that have been popping out? You've been asking some superb ones so far.
Oh boy, before we start. I don't think so. I'm kind of picking up the questions from the information. So I think you just kind of jump right into the story here and I'll piggyback off of something.
Okay. Weibo is going around with a Jax ban to not let Bin onto that champion. This should be banned, first ban against him at all times. Jarvan Rakan, meaning that we won't see the Xayah Rakan pinch. We've got Orianna, Rumble, and Nico. So red team opting to go for all power bans. Means that we have Ashe first picked. That's flexible. They can play carry or support. It gets answered with Kalista Vi. Now, Kalista is one of the champions that can take it to Ashe. Ashe can actually go Q and actually fight her toe-to-toe. Vi, Kalista together tends to be a pattern where you want to play around bot lane because you lock people down enough. But that means that they leave up Poppy, which is one of the strongest champions, and they get Varus as well. So they actually take it back. Now, this is now the third team that we've seen Varus and Ashe played together, and in a very bizarre twist, we see a Caitlyn support. Caitlyn showed up as a support meta option to fight against other long range champions. Be like, I'm the longest range. I will play for the bushes and I will stay ahead of you. The problem is that they can't lock anyone down. Kalista, if she tries to go forward on them, is going to get 2v1'd. And if Caitlyn tries to play for the bush, then Ashe Varus are going to have tremendous amount of poke. So another weird spot for Caitlyn, unfortunately. Second round of bans, because Poppy was there, you always take away Azir and then Tillia secondary, but you never want to let Azir and Poppy together because of superior synergies. Similarly, Weibo goes ahead and bans Sylas because Sylas can steal these supportive ultimates. So a very, very unique draft. I don't think we're going to see Caitlyn support anymore unless they win this game and they trounce it. Like, this is a weird spot. Caitlyn, I am not a fan of Caitlyn at all for this entire tournament. I don't think she should get played. And this is now our second time in 2 games. We'll see whether or not she bites the dust.
Okay, so we were talking last game about the draft and basically how in the first couple minutes everything was centered around Jax being in top, and what does that mean? And what's the new sort of map of champ select where Jax is off the table?
So Aatrox, they put the high priority on this again. So Aatrox is a champion that I have firmly below a couple of other top laners, but because of how good these players are on the pick, they're going to be very, very comfortable playing it. I think there are stronger picks available. Like, we haven't seen Cassante, Renekton. Rumble was banned. Renekton is kind of that safe pick. You just pick it on R4 when you don't know what your matchup is, and you're just pretty happy about it. Same thing with Cassante, depending on what you want from the role. But with this draft, already looking at it, when you take Caitlyn as a support, you have to win lane. Okay, so we should expect to see Vi sitting on this bot lane. And because of that, we should see wards on the bottom quadrant. They're trying to get answers for, what might be approaching them. You see this ward right here. It's meant to catch any late invades, anyone scooting across this river. It's also meant to be spotted, or it's meant to not be spotted. See how it's out of the fog in either direction? It's one of those wards that you can drop down that won't get swept, which is exactly what you're trying to do. So they get everything that they want out of that ward. Except now they have to choose how do they respond? So BLG, this is a prep ward right here, absolutely phenomenal. Do you see what I'm talking about? Where it didn't get spotted by the sweepers. It also made it so that it would catch 2 different avenues coming into their jungle.
Wow.
Beautiful adaptation. That means that they're going to be able to play a little bit more aggressively with full knowledge of exactly how deep Poppy goes. But now the question is going to be, what does Vi do to exploit this? Normally, you'd see Vi go and immediately start taking these camps, but she may be trying to stagger respawn timers, so she may go for her own camps before going into this. If we do end up with vertical jungling, the big loser here is going to be Kalista. Because Kalista is playing against Poppy. Poppy can always just come in for a dive. You always have to be cognizant of where this champion is coming from. And Poppy specifically tends to run Hex Flash in her secondary runes. You'll see that she's got Phase Rush here. It's meant for like combo damage. You try to flash in, get the stomps, but it's also going to have like Celerity, Nimbus, Cloak, and Water Walking, so that she has exceptional mobility around the map. Now,
so when you talk about the Caitlyn pick necessitating that you're winning lane, this sounds very face up to me.
yes.
Everybody knows that must be the game plan. So where does that leave each team in terms of, we both know that Caitlyn needs to win lane. What are we each going to do about it? What are we expecting the opposition to do about it? It sounds like that's where things more or less should be centered.
Mm-hmm. So we got that answer as far as what their game plan is based on where Vi moved, right? So Vi went 1, 2, 3, and then she came down on this side. Also, we saw that Poppy did not clear the Gromp. So Poppy's intention was to actually leave this spawn staggered up, so to create a gap in the experience that Vi has access to, because she won't have a respawned Gromp at her normal timer. Whereas Poppy was able to take that momentum, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kill her own camps, fight for the scuttle. Vi coming down here right after a 1, 2, 3 start on the top side, working our way down. Remember that in the game we played, Vi actually tucked herself back around and came and ganked Syndra like that?
Ooh, yes.
That would have been a potential answer where you're expecting everyone to move bottom and you're like, okay, true to form, we can guess that Vi's finishing topside and coming to bot, except now she might circle around for this gank. Now, other options, she could have gone into true vertical jungling and trying to just take the opposite side camps here. She didn't want to give Poppy respawn camps, has to be the reason. Here we go. Get the engage. No, all right.
Right. So I see what their plan was. Is that what you would have selected if you were the one, making the decisions on all, for all 10 parties at once? Is that the pathing you would have chosen?
Yeah, you know what? Based on that ward that they placed, that is one of the best options for coming up with a good defense to the delayed invade, is to say, we've seen you. We now have very good information about where you are. Vi can hit level 3 in peace and then come over here and we can actually look to collapse on you at the Gromp camp. Or you have to get out, in which case we just objectively have access to more experience on the first wave, because Vi will have access to a 4th camp, whereas Poppy needs to go back over here and clear 3, 4, 5 on her own side. She won't get level 3 until she goes back. So it's a pretty good answer for what they're, like we said, playing face up, what they're trying to accomplish. It's, hey, we need Caitlyn to win. We put Vi over here. We got good information about exactly how much the enemy team's trying to play for a vertical situation, but we're still going to muscle our way into this. The big loser in this situation is Aatrox. So, like, there's an opportunity cost for all of these. And in this case, Graves has superlative pushing ability. He also has a fantastic matchup against Aatrox because he can dash, which not only gives himself extra bullets, but also puts himself out of or inside of the range of the sweet spots to make sure that they're never, Aatrox is largely gated on hitting his sweet spots. Graves can play for that, and you see what this is designed to do, right? This is about burying the lane, pushing it in hard, getting this. Yes, you've accomplished safety in this bot lane duo, and they are going to play with some advantage, and you see that expressing itself in a CS lead here, but they gave up 23 CS and 2 plates in the top lane to accomplish that. And when we talk about playing face up, this is like they're playing face up with pocket jacks. Like, they're not even aces, like. Or
I
like
was
what?
just about to ask: is it worth it? Let's say you're getting it all in with Jax, and I don't know, maybe you're calling somebody that shoves light, and it's a coin flip, and
yeah. In this case, I would.
Is this a coin flip, or are we way ahead, or what's going on?
I will never take Kate. In this draft, I would never put this draft together.
So you wouldn't want that bot lane advantage at the cost of 2 plates?
No, never. And
1 plate?
It's yeah, right. So there is an amount. I'm sure that the Graves pick is something that they're not necessarily expecting. They may have. They may have. You know, the shy has actually been a pioneer. There's actually a time where he was playing Callista, and Callista needed to get patched around being too good in top lane solo because he could do it. No one else in the world was doing it well, but the shy was crushing everybody by playing Callista top lane. So like interesting, like small things, you know, he is a pioneer. He plays way more different champions, whereas Ben like prioritizes, you know, Jax above everything, and then a pool of like 4 others underneath that. When we're talking about what we're getting out of this draft and the fact that you picked Caitlyn in the bot lane to go with Callista, there's a lot of things that are so weird about it. Like, all right, so part of Callista's passive on, I want to say it's her W. It's her W, right? So on her W is whenever I hit someone, if the person who I'm soul sworn to, the person that I like made eat my black spear at the beginning, if they hit the same target as I do, they take a huge chunk of percent max health damage. And that's good for being a bully. And you're like, who do I want to pair with that? Well, clearly I want the longest range champion in the entire game. That seems like a really easy pairing. So when we both hit them, they take a big chunk of damage. But later in the game, how are they going to play with no tanks and double AD carry? Like Vi cannot really be called a tank, even if she built her tankiest version of herself, like Divine Sunder or Frozen Heart, something like this. Gargoyle Stoneplate, maybe even after that, or Death Stance. She's still just not a tank the way that a Sejuani is, for example.
So you're saying basically they're just asking for too much to go right, where you need to be ahead in the lane with Kaylin. You're giving up a little bit too much in order to be ahead there. And then even when you are ahead and you're giving things up, well, your late game doesn't look great. So I don't know. What's the counter argument? What does somebody who actually picks Kaylin in that spot say to you to justify actually, no, you're wrong. This wasn't just a disaster from the beginning.
They would have to get a kill. They would have to be able to. I mean, they basically have gotten that almost. You know, a 20 CS lead is similar to a kill. You haven't gotten the experience gain. They would need to win by so much, though. Like, I'm trying to think how far ahead you'd have to be in this lane. Probably 2,000 gold just in this lane by the end of lane phase. You'd have to bury the wave, and it's still Varus Ashe, which is one of the best lane combinations that you can have. Period. So they think that they can fight fire with like a dominant lane phase and saying, okay, you want to go double AD carry? We'll go double AD carry, but we've got Caitlyn, so we'll beat you. The thing is, Ashe and Varus offer way more to fights than Callista or Caitlyn. It's not even close. You know, Caitlyn can put out a trap line that is almost impossible to cover. Even the thinnest of choke points, there's almost always still a way to get around Caitlyn traps. And that takes time and pressure, and she's squishy, right? Like, we're going to see Umbral Glaive into, I don't know what. Like, it's going to be Umbral Glaive so that they have some amount of vision control with this champion. But as you get into this later stage, there is not a single person here who can hold their ground against Syndra. Like, Syndra, Varus, Ashe are going to be throwing deadly spells over walls at you, where if anyone on your team gets hit by them, there's not a single person on here that's tanky enough to get hit by any of these. This hits, or Syndra QE hits, and we're talking about everyone following up, and no one on your team can survive that. So it's, to get this draft and make it work well, you'd have to get at least a 2k advantage here, to the point where you say, I can just walk up to any of you and just rip into you despite your best efforts. And honestly, that doesn't work against these champions, because your Callista, they're not point and click stuns. Poppy is point and click. She moves you in a direction, and moving you in a direction, then she presses W so you can't dash. And in that moment, that should be more than enough time for one of these 3 people to follow up. And as long as one of them hits, the other 2 are coming. And your Callista is dead. And so even if you've created that 2K gold lead from just this singular position by 14 minutes, it's still faulty.
Okay, so you're big on the team comp for Weibo. So if you're saying that's a pretty substantial advantage just from the draft, if you're gonna take blue team any day before we get to the Rift, what kind of odds would you put on that? Let's say you're the bookmaker. If somebody wants to bet on red team, what kind of odds do they need?
You know what? I'd put it right at what blue team is winning the tournament at. I'd give it 4-1.
Oh boy.
Like 80-20 is due for regression. Okay, like that should not happen. The blue team should not be winning at 80%. Okay. That said, this comp, I would gladly put the line there. And
Well, but if it already started at 80-20, you're saying the comp didn't really make it any worse.
I mean, no, I would say it is worse. Red team should not be losing. Like 80-20 is not where it should be. 80-20 is an anomaly, and it's largely happening through drafts, and that's what's happening right here. So when I talk about this draft, red team tried to come up with an answer for blue one, or we'll call it, this was 1, 2, 3. And their answer was something that I don't think works, period. So, I mean, this is as close to a complete domination in the draft as I've seen, actually, since a similar stage last year in Worlds. It was, I believe, a quarterfinals match. It was T1, and they had a team comp where they just outranged the enemy team completely, and they had disengage, and the enemy team didn't have enough engage tools to ever force a fight. And I believe that game, I want to go back. I'm going to put a link in the description below, but I believe that game was won with only 2 kills.
It sounds like you're putting red team at about 5%, to be honest.
Maybe that's it.
I mean, well, it's like if there was so much impact from Caitlyn. You know what? Actually, maybe I'm misunderstanding the variables here. You're saying, yeah, blue team is 80% because they get an advantage in the draft. Okay, and what happened here was exactly that, where they got a huge advantage. So we should expect that to play out as normal, so to speak. Okay, I take back the 5%, but yeah, it's in a way it's interesting to kind of hear that prediction get sort of verified, where it's like, if everybody has access to this information, that it's a big deal to get the first pick, and you're sort of, you're necessarily on the back foot as red, then how do you end up putting yourself in this position? I guess you're saying they thought Caitlyn was a legitimate answer when, according to you, it's just not. But it does make me wonder, like, where's that discrepancy coming from? And I guess you did provide an explanation for what the counter argument would be.
So here's one of those situations that you might be looking for as the Caitlyn team. You get 3 traps down, you're here, you've got long range, and you say, all right, we've got access to this dragon, and we're feeling pretty good about it. Okay, and we were able to get here first. Now, we necessarily are going to give up a lot of mid lane pressure, but we've got 3 dragons for ourselves. And this is the other thing we're talking about, 2K lead from Kalista, or I have a significant bot lane lead, so my Kalista's going to be good. But now as we approach the next dragon, right, happening 5 minutes from now, I don't see a world where Poppy is not just able to steamroll into the team. Now, they might say, like, hey, we're actually pretty good. We've got 3 dragons. I mean, they are down 2K against a team that outscales them. And even if they get soul this game, it's not going to be enough, frankly. But, like, right now, they would need to be working on soul and a combined, like, a collective 5K advantage as a team. And that's just not going to happen. And somehow, so here's the other weird thing. If you want this and you don't really have tanks, then this should be a control mage. And if this is a control mage, then you can say, all right, we have some amount of pressure. By making it a Kali, you're basically saying, I'm a trap line, I'm 3 flankers, I don't have front to back, and yet I'm playing around a double AD carry bot lane. So, like, how are these carries ever supposed to have room for a fight? The only way that they're going to have fight is if our Aatrox and Akali are such enormous threats where we can threaten the flank so hard that they are forced to move laterally away from our carries, and therefore our carries are still able to deal damage. It's just a very bizarre space to be in. And then that would force you to put effort into these and not put effort into the bot lane. And then you don't get, it's like its own paradox. You can't make, I don't see a world where you make this draft work. It's so difficult. You literally need every one of them to get fed. How do you play for all 3 of these to win? You can't.
So, yeah, I guess, is there any world where we're just busy in our own heads in magical Christmas land, and we're just we're letting the hubris take over? And what happens if we're ahead here and we're ahead here? Oh, well, that looks really good, but it's just not realistic to take all these advantages at once. I mean, is that possibly how we got here?
Yeah, I think individually it's easy to say, okay, I like Aatrox as a blind pick. Okay, I like Akali into control mages. Okay, I like Kalista and Caitlyn as a way to fight against this bot lane. But then when you look at the totality of the comp, it's just like look at this team right here. Poppy just got to stand in the middle of them while everyone from blue team is ripping into everyone from red team. And sure, like, this is actually a great result for them, trading Vi for Poppy. You're okay with that, like, all in all. But now that's even your only tool of jumping forward. Where does Akali and Aatrox, like, where do they ever get in? I don't see where they can ever get into these fights.
Now, here's a different sort of question. If you're the coach and you're able to, see from up here in our privileged positions, we're not playing the game, we're just here deciding what decisions the players were supposed to make because we know everything. How do you take your team going into the next game and say, look, I understand you thought that this was a good idea in the moment, and I get your reasoning, and here's how wrong you are. Don't do it again. How do you get somebody on board with this comp was a disaster, even though you might have thought in the moment it wasn't? Like, how are you working with your players as individuals to say, I get where you're coming from, and don't ever do that again?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why team culture needs to precede the positive results. You need to make sure that you have a good dynamic where you can trust each other, where even if there's a mistake, it doesn't cause catastrophe, right? Or it doesn't cause, you still have open communication channels where you can discuss these things. Now, these drafts are not done by the players, or I should say they are technically not done by the players. There is a coach with them on stage that is theoretically telling them which champions to pick. That said, there are plenty of allegories, very public ones, from professional leagues where their coach says, I want you to pick X, and player says, no, K is really strong here, I want to play K, pick me K. And they seemingly always gravitate towards the player. And the reasoning being that players have a sort of insight. Hold on, let's watch this fight, the preparation. So this is what we were talking about, where we're going to have flanking positions from Yagao. You see Bin on Aatrox. This champion is not normally supposed to be a front to back setup like this. Akali is. Akali wants to be this flanking. You see the threat, but now Poppy's just going to go into the front. Now they're trying to consolidate onto Weiwei. They try to get all these kills, but look at that. Poppy's still at full health. They've taken this whole fight over. They've only given up 50% of their HP bar anywhere, and they're already getting kills, and they get the dragon. This is what I expect to happen in these fights. There is no great way for BLG to put it. So, answering the question about like what can you do in the draft, it's supposed to be a coach putting this together. And just like in football, you'd expect that there's a play caller in a booth who can watch the game and say, I want you to play ZX banana Y split, and they call a play. But then the quarterback can look at it and see the defense and be like, audible. I want to switch to, kill or alert. Like, I want to change the play. Let's do this other play instead. You want to empower your player to do that in the game once it's out of your hands. But as far as like putting a draft together, they clearly had some idea. I'm hoping this is something they've rehearsed and not just a player says, no, give me a collie here because I want to beat Syndra. Like that could have happened. There's a chance that did happen. But as looking at this draft, it is from this point on, I don't expect blue team to even take a dent in any fight.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I had no idea of the format here. I didn't even realize it was a coach making the decisions and then the players being able to not necessarily veto, but basically say, look, I have a different idea. And if you end up forcing me into your plan, that's probably just worse for us. So you might as well go with it.
Yeah. Either one's a bad dynamic, right? You don't want player changing the coach's plan. And you don't want player trying to put together a plan that they didn't think was going to work, because then they don't necessarily understand. It shows that they don't understand what the goal was and the objective was.
Yep, for sure.
It could easily happen. I mean, and from the stories that I've heard in the LCS, like it happens a lot. And there's a prominent coach that suggests that analysts are just a completely dead position because no matter how hard they work, hold on, let's see. This is the best possible situation. Aatrox diving in, a collie with a flank. This is their only chance to get exactly the type of fight. It'd be super aggressive, but Caitlyn's already zoned out of the fight. She's stepping back. She's got no health. She should have been willing to int to try to carry this. Not even carry. She should be willing to int to deal the maximum amount of damage, but because she's a marksman, she doesn't have a kit. She does nothing in fights. She gets one Q cast, one R cast, and she puts out traps, and that's it. So that was the best possible situation for BLG. Props to them for finding an avenue to try to get the best spot. But Weibo is just like, yeah, we're strong enough. You can't really, you can't stop us. It's sort of like the protester trying to lay down in front of Big Machine, and Big Machine is like, all right, just keep going. I don't know, Look at Poppy right here, positioning right in between the fight. The Shy as well, right? So Graves and Poppy holding down. You got a classic front-to-back situation. Xiaohu is able to kite back, as is Crisp. They're able to kite backwards because they have stronger people in the front. That means that Aatrox and Akali have to dive further ahead of their team than they were comfortable doing. And Caitlyn stopped being able to support them because it's a Caitlyn. Ugh, bizarre. Props to them for finding a very good opportunity. They tucked a ward way behind the fight for Akali to teleport to. Importantly, not a control ward. Control wards would have revealed their position, but instead being on a blank ward or a vision ward, it meant that they got in without being seen. They found one of the best avenues possible for Akali to flank and create the type of fight they're looking for, but it just wasn't enough. So let's see, what was left? I think we got most of the points on that. Was there another part of that question?
Yeah, sure. Just a quick follow-up. If you were gonna personally speculate on, do you feel like this failure of a draft was from some player insistence on, no, let me deviate from the script, or do you think this was just a big picture coaching failure? What do you think is more likely?
Well, ultimately, I'm going to say it has to be a coaching failure, even if it is a player failure. Even if a player is insisting on something, the fact that the coaches have not created the sort of culture that would allow for the trust, that would speak to a coaching failure in and of itself. All right, so Weibo's going to take their time. They're going to take this area, put control wards down in the bushes so that if a fight does break out, they can move into these. Look at how Poppy's positioning in front of the two carries, puts up the wall, make sure that there's no way in, bops them out, they isolate Aatrox. This is clinically done. Like, for as much as I can talk about what might have been, like, you know, the process that allowed these bad things to happen to them, it still needs to be executed well by Weibo, and they have been, right? Like, this is still at its heart, it is a super team, and they may have taken a long time to put things together, but they certainly have the individual skill to team fight well. They are blasted in the crucible of Chinese professional scene, which is the most explosive team fighting that you can get. And I don't think that they're going to make those mistakes. You know, you can ask them to, you can ask those questions, but are you actually going to expect anything less than really, really, really good from them? It's bizarre. Yeah, to answer that question further, I mean, it has to be coaches, because on one side, the culture is either bad enough where the players don't trust you, or you've put them in a position where you failed, right? One of those two. Either way, it's a coaching failure.
Yep.
Now you can get false positives in a couple different ways. Either, you know, hubris, adrenaline can take over. I can carry this game if you give me X, you know. And they 10th picked Akali, and this was a weird thing. Like, I would expect something like a Victor, right? A long range control mage that can actually hold space so that your team can create a flank or actually hope to sustain a fight front to back, because otherwise Kalista has no way to do it. Or something that actually has been used against Syndra even is to put a tank in the mid lane like Cassante, and you say, all right, Syndra, you can't move me. Like, I'm a tank. You know, it's, what are you actually going to, you can pepper me with spells all day long. I'm a tank. You can't move me. And then later in the game, you have that tank to provide that front line for Kalista. By playing for Akali, it becomes this really weird, you know, trial by fire, must jump out of the frying pan into the fire and succeed anyways. It's just a very bizarre spot to be in. The other place that it could come from is winning scrims. These teams scrim against each other. Part of the practice culture that I do not agree with at all is that they play against other teams and they get the majority of their, we'll call it, findings about metagames. They get it from competitive games against other competitive teams. And they do it in a scrim environment, which is unfortunately way more casual than they would like it to be. Teams will still limit test and maybe not go for their A1 strategy because they don't want to reveal their A1 strategy. They also it's a practice. They're having fun compared to like the adrenaline of being on stage. So you can actually play against a very good team with this type of lineup and win anyways because you're that good, or because the other team just didn't want to play patiently with a team fight positioning, you know, that could just clobber you, right? This Poppy seems to single-handedly undo everything this team wants to do, which is something Poppy is notorious for. She stops dashes, and every new champion that comes out seems to have 3 or 4 dashes. And Akali got reworked and has a billion dashes. and Kalista dashes, and Aatrox dashes, and Vi dashes, even Caitlyn dashes to disengage. And so Poppy, in the middle of this squishy team, becomes an immovable object. And in a scrim scenario, people might just go for the next fight. They might just go for it. And in that case, you might actually balloon your lead because the enemy team goes after you a little bit too much. And you say, okay, sweet, you fought into my Kalista. Well, this game, you saw that they just gave up 3 dragons, and then they fought for the 4th one. And they're like, okay, this is my way. You know, now we take over. You have not generated enough of a lead for yourself. And even if they had, I still don't know whether, like, enough of a lead is such a weird, nebulous term, because even then, Kalista, like I said, these 4 champions are so good at locking her down that it just feels like Weibo came up with a much, much, much better draft.